Greetings. I'm Dave Mace, your host for this show. The show is Outside the Veil, and this is the 8th episode of True Ghost Stories. This episode's topic is Alcatraz Prison, and we'll be covering its ghosts, histories, and some little-known facts about this San Francisco icon. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Old penitentiaries just seem to be a natural place to find ghosts. Perhaps it's their morbid appearance, the stone walls, barred windows, and looming towers that touch the darkest recesses of our minds. There's nothing pleasant about the look of a prison. However, it seems it's more than just the psychological effect that stimulates ghostly activity at these stone fortresses. And it might be the type of dark energy generated from so many evil men over so many long years. Imagine the despair of evil men taken to a rocky island, which has a view of a beautiful city just out of reach. $1 million view, only to know there is no escape, and some would never leave the island alive. But this is only part of the story of the island de las Alcatraz. Alcatraz was for the most part a very unattractive island. Even early explorers saw it as a hard-to-access, guano-covered chunk of sandstone located in the very swift waters of San Francisco Bay. Native Americans often used the island as a fishing base, but did not leave much behind in the way of artifacts. Spanish officers named the Island de los Alcatraz, or Island of the Pelicans, because so many of them inhabited the landmass. Not much thought was given to the island until it was surveyed for the first time by the military in 1847. The survey eventually led to the island's development as a base for protection of the now vital bay. In 1854, Congress approved funding to build the fortifications needed to protect the San Francisco Bay from intruders. It may come as some surprise that many in the military feared an attack from Great Britain and felt the need to arm our coasts. When Great Britain began massing ships in Vancouver, these fears were heightened. Later, during the Civil War, that fear would be transferred to the Confederacy. Alcatraz saw many physical changes from barren island to fortress. A small jail had been added to house the 15 to 20 military convicts, but in 1856, additional convicts were brought in for manual labor. As time went on, additional cells were added, as were more guns to the battlements. But just after the Spanish-American War, funding for coastal arms was ended, and in 1905, suggestions started to surface that Alcatraz might make a good prison. Between 1875 and 1901, there was 35 deaths on Alcatraz. Besides the military and prisoners housed there, officers' families were also allowed to live on the island. Of those deaths, 5 were suicide, and 1 was murder. The murder resulted when an army captain killed his wife with a shotgun and then killed himself. Other deaths occurred as time went on. In 1905, Sergeant Roy Ford threw Private Thomas Mullally out a third-story window, killing the private on impact. In despair or cowardice, the sergeant then shot himself. While there were deaths on the island, there were also births. No less than 19 babies were born on Alcatraz between 1884 and 1907. There were countless children living on the island over the years, and this would also have some meaning for a paranormal encounter I had on the rock, but we'll get back to that. Alcatraz became a prison more by accident than by design. The military has always needed a place to house soldiers who committed offenses, and Alcatraz was a natural place to keep the more troublesome military inmates. The Civil War resulted in a need for more places to accommodate prisoners, not just Northerners, but Confederate captives, some military, some civilian. While records are missing for this period, only about 15 to 20 prisoners were held in these early days. Over time, the government kept sending prisoners, and eventually they had more prisoners than they had cells. Some reports indicated that a few prisoners were placed in charge of policing the facility because there just weren't enough guards to do it. An interesting note. In the early days as a military prison, prisoners did escape Alcatraz, and fairly often too. While the conditions were deplorable on the island, it was a very lax place to be held a prisoner. Prisoners were not allowed to stay in their cells during the day and lounged around and socialized pretty much at will. 1887 was a particularly bad year for escapes, as Alcatraz had 9 inmates successfully escape the island. In following years, things tightened up a bit, and several inmates died in their attempts to escape. Some were shot, and others succumbed to the hazards involved. By all accounts, the prison was not a pleasant place to be, and there were many horrors endured by those that had problems following rules. Things would change, but not necessarily for the better as time went on. In October 1933, the Justice Department announced its intentions to place a federal penitentiary on Alcatraz. Not without much protest from the citizens of San Francisco, of course. Despite their concerns, the federal government moved forward. Many changes were made to the facility, including the addition of tool-proof bars and locking mechanisms. The warden handpicked an expert group of guards, and the first federal prisoners arrived in August 1934. Let me skip much of the history from this point on and jump on to some other things that might be more related to paranormal claims on the rock. In these early years of the penitentiary, the men placed here were very hard and considered agitators, likely to attempt to escape and commit violent acts. Things were very regimented, and punishment could result in being placed in isolation in either cell blocks A or D, which had not yet been improved, or the Citadel basement, often referred to as the dungeon. In 1960, a book published by the Bureau of Prisons reported that 38 men had died at the prison. Of the 38 men, 25 appeared to have been natural causes or illnesses. Only one suicide was reported, at least in this report. One other event needs to be discussed as well. From 1969 to 1971, a highly publicized act occurred when Native Americans occupied the island in an attempt to draw attention to the plight of many Indians across the country and broken treaties. During this time, several accidents occurred, including a fire which destroyed the old warden's mansion and lighthouse. A turning point in the occupation came when the leader's 13-year-old daughter fell down a stairway and died. Yvonne Oakes was transported to a San Francisco hospital but died as a result of trauma to her head several hours later. The occupiers refused to allow the FBI or any law enforcement on to investigate. There is so much more history that could be shared, but this is just a quick overview that illustrates the emotional impressions that could be imprinted there, as well as the number of souls who actually lost their physical lives there. If anywhere were primed to be haunted, then Alcatraz certainly qualifies. Alcatraz officials have not been particularly welcoming when it comes to paranormal research. Several television shows have been able to do investigations there, and I'm sure it wouldn't have happened without the production companies paying large sums of money in return. For the most part, the Park Service officials' stance there is there's nothing supernatural going on at Alcatraz. Whether that's true or not, I can't say that I blame them for being so protective of the island. I've been to Alcatraz several times, and it's never failed to impress me. Just the boat ride alone is a treat, seeing the city's skyline, the Golden Gate Bridge, contrasted against the stone and brick of Alcatraz. Makes you really appreciate what it must have been like for both convicts and guards living there. There are plenty of ghost stories originating from the rock. One of the most famous is that of Cell 14D. Cell 14D is an isolation cell. It's reported that an inmate placed in this cell as punishment begged and pleaded to be let out and claimed that there was something in the cell with him. He screamed and screamed throughout the night. He complained that the thing had glowing red eyes and it was tormenting him. The report went on to say that the guard ignored him and eventually the man quieted down, but the next morning, when they opened the cell, they found him strangled to death. Then there's the story of the ghost of Miles O'Brien. Some say he still haunts the prison, which is interesting since Miles was never at Alcatraz, but he was an Irish gangster of the time. It seems that prior to Al Capone being sentenced to prison for tax evasion, he and his gang killed Miles as he sat on a windowsill at his flower shop, which was the front for his Irish criminal activities. Al Capone claimed that Miles followed him everywhere and would torment him nightly in his cell. Prisoners sharing the same block as Capone confirmed that they would hear the one-time gang leader begging Miles to leave him alone and then hear laughter echo throughout the block. Many feel Miles is still there, as the haunting laughter is still occasionally heard to this day. As with most places that have ghost stories, Alcatraz has employees that have heard and seen ghosts and other employees that have never seen anything out of the ordinary. I always wonder if the latter do not want to experience anything, or it's the ones who do that want to too much. One of my visits to Alcatraz was during a nighttime tour of the island. I had brought an EMF detector and digital recorder. As we got off the boat, I noticed that a sense of despair just kind of hung in the air on Alcatraz. You could see misty fog move through the corridors. Despite that, I thought it would feel a lot spookier at night, but to my surprise, I felt more comfortable walking through the dimly lit corridors than I did during the day. Occasionally, when I could, I would slip off and find myself alone and take some readings and recordings, a couple of photos. I always had the distinct feeling that there were many eyes upon me, But I didn't feel threatened, more curiosity than menacing. However, I also felt I shouldn't be challenging the spirits here. I did notice I would hear banging of bars or the sounds of something moving in the darkness, but nothing definitive. In fact, I only captured one piece of evidence during our time there. While moving through cell block D, the area where the red-eyed demon was supposed to reside, we checked the interiors of each cell. I didn't notice anything especially scary about cell 14, except that I certainly wouldn't have wanted to be locked inside it. My wife and I walked into the neighboring cells and I started an EVP session. The main group moved on and we were pretty much left alone. I asked my daughter if we were in cell 10. From the inside where I was, I couldn't read the number above the exterior door. She was standing by the door and she looked out and up and then answered saying it was cell 9. Later, when reviewing the recording, I was startled to hear another voice pipe in just after my daughter. Just after she responded that it was cell 9, the voice that sounded to be that of a child of 10 or older said,
"No, it's 6.
I had the impression that the child was being contrary just for fun, but I was wondering why a child would be on Alcatraz. Later, my research found that many children lived on the island, as previously discussed, and the only record I could find of a child actually dying there was that of Yvonne Oakes. But that doesn't mean that other deaths didn't occur there as well. There were many periods of the history of the island where record keeping was not a priority, and many of the records were just simply lost. It's also interesting to note that there is no cemetery on Alcatraz. There is a cemetery on the nearby Angel Island, which has 143 graves. About a quarter of them are from Alcatraz. Apparently, the ground on Alcatraz is too hard and not suitable for burials. So anyone dying on the island that didn't have family or prior funeral arrangements was taken to the island to be buried. Most of the paranormal activity reported is audible. People often report groaning and moaning coming from various locations. One of the more interesting ghosts is said to play a banjo in the shower room. Some believe that that's the ghost of Al Capone, because Al Capone did play a banjo in the prison band, and was considered by many of his fellow inmates to be fairly good at it too. The prison held anywhere from 222 to 302 prisoners while it was in operation. From a paranormal standpoint, I think it's ridiculous and a little short-sighted to think that only the famous or infamous spirits haunted the grounds. Researchers often banter about the names like Robert Stroud, aka the Birdman of Alcatraz, and Al Capone, even though neither man died on the island. It is more likely that any one of many persons who actually died there would have left some spiritual remains on the island. I find it hard to believe that anyone finally getting off the rock would be drawn back there for any reason. However, I suppose it's possible for a person with a strong personality to have left some residual essence behind regardless of where they died. For those of you who like visiting haunted locations, I highly recommend a tour of Alcatraz Island. I'll let you determine if it's haunted or not. Even if you don't have any interest in the paranormal, the island is a fascinating historical look at an important part of our American history that starts long before the first explorers arrived. I hope you've enjoyed this little visit to Alcatraz Island, and I think you really must go there in person to really get the full effect of the place. You can visit the island almost any day from Fisherman's Wharf, and there are night tours available as well. Be sure to check the websites before you go. Some require previous ticket purchases. The Park Service does offer a limited number of people the opportunity to pay a fee, then help clean up the park for 45 minutes to an hour. In return, you may spend the night there. There are restrictions, so check with the Park Service website first. Well, I don't know about you, but all this time on the island has chilled me to the bone a bit. I want to thank you for listening to this and other episodes of True Ghost Stories, and I hope you'll keep coming back. When you do, I'll be waiting here, outside the veil.